So this episode of Summer Sew It All is a little bit different because I am not making clothing. I had started working on my purple dress from last video about when I started work on this project because I was working on the dress and I was getting fairly frustrated, and so I didn't want to do it, so I was trying to find another thing to procrastinate with, but because the dress was the only thing that I was working on, I didn't have anything. And as I was tossing a bunch of scraps into my giant Goodwill bag of scrap fabric, I thought, hey, you know, it would be so epic and awesome is if I finally did something with this giant bag of extra fabric that I refused to throw away and make some whales. So whenever I wanted to procrastinate on the purple dress, I would just start cutting up all of that scrap fabric and shredding it down to make stuffing so that I could make little whales, which is what we are making in this episode of my Summer Sew It All series. So, alliteration. To get started, I had to make a pattern because I had seen a few on Pinterest that I thought were so cute, but I couldn't find the actual pattern, which is frustrating because usually when there's a Pinterest link to a ridiculous random website of like, this is the pattern for this, and then you can't find the pattern anywhere, usually I'm the person that can trace it back to its original source, but I really couldn't with the whale thing. I just could not find the whales, and the only thing that was available to me was like the weird kind of really blurry outline of the pattern that was pictured in the actual pin. So I just basically drew what I thought those pieces would look like and cut those all out and taped it all together to see if it would work, and then I adjusted the cutout outline, which is what you saw me doing earlier. I took that first draft and I kind of figured out what I wanted to do, and then I am now drafting the proper pattern. So the things that I changed from that original pattern is, as you can see, the tail is attached to that side piece that's on the top right of the screen right now. I didn't like how that worked. It was really hard to tape it together. I don't know, it might have been easier to sew. I don't know because I didn't try sewing it. So I originally tried to draft it so that it would fit, and then did not continue doing that. Eventually I just cut the tail portion off and I figured I can sew the tail onto the back strip and that will be how I do it. So that is how I adjusted the side pieces. I adjusted the curvature of the head. I adjusted how long the tail was, because that was another thing, is I thought that the tail portion of it could be a little bit longer. So I did that. I measured out properly how long that strip was supposed to be so that I could get the right sized strip, and on the original pattern it kind of tapered down into like a full triangle shape, and that is not, it did not work for me at all. I was like, this is weird looking. So I drafted it so that it was still tapered, but it ended in a straight line, which actually made it so much easier. If I were to adjust this pattern, which I did after this, I would, and have done, put the tail piece onto this back piece, because when you sew up the entire whale, you end up having to sew the top tail onto this back piece. It's like, why didn't I just cut it all out together as one big piece? It probably would have been hard to cut out of the scrap fabric because I cut all of these whales out of all of my scrap fabrics, so it might have been hard to find pieces that were long enough to have the entire back and tail portion, but that is what I would do. Here is me taping together this second draft to see if it would work. It was much more successful, but it turns out that taping paper in any sort of round fashion is really hard. So I struggled a lot trying to get the taping to work, but I didn't want to cut it all out and sew it all together because it would take so much more time than just taping it all together did. So I did it kind of the cheaty way, where I just taped my pattern pieces together so that I could see what it was going to look like. And once they were all completely taped together, it looked like a whale. I didn't end up taping out, I forgot the side fins, I don't know what you call the side, the ones that are like arms for the whale. I didn't draft those as part of this mock-up, which I then went back and traced the shape of the tail fin so that I could make the little side fins. So they do have side fins, but it looked pretty good, and I was fairly certain that once it was stuffed, that weird concave part of the head would be fixed and it would be a big round blob. So I decided to proceed took a little break to try and finish cutting fabric. That marine layer bag of fabric is what is left of the entire Goodwill bag. You can see the giant Goodwill bag. It's one of those really big ones that they give you, and they usually give it to you when you have bought like 5 things and you're like, why am I carrying this like 40-gallon bag? It's like a full trash cans bag worth. Anyway, I had it. It was full of the scrap fabric. You can see just how full it is of all of those little pieces that I had spent hours and hours cutting, and I was originally going to try and make my way through this entire extra marine layer bag. I got pretty dang close, but eventually I was like, this is probably enough stuffing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I had to go back and actually cut out some more of the scrap fabric to finish my whale. But to be fair, I made it through 6 of the 7 whales, which I thought was pretty impressive. This was the only tedious part of this process. This was so joyful to me. I was getting very bogged down in the like must make fancy thing, must make complicated thing, must work hard, because that is how my brain works. I'm constantly like, I need to be improving, I need to be so good. And this was just fun. Every single part of this was easy and fun. I got to stuff the whale. Stuffing the whales was a little bit silly because I left the front end of them open, so it was like I was feeding them. I was like, here, have some stuffing. But I made one whale first to test it out, and I made them little like Build-A-Bear hearts. So all of the whales that I made have little hearts that say I love you, because I think that's really important. So I gave it a little like happy kissy for the whale, and put the little heart in it because I thought that was so cute. This is the greatest thing that I've ever made. So with that first whale made and successful, I could start on the other whales. I knew I wanted to make 7 of these whales, because I had 7 people in mind. I'm going to send these whales to people that I love, and they get to have a little whale, because I don't need 7 whales, but I did have 7 whales worth of fabric. Whale is starting to stop sounding like a word. Anyway, I decided to do this in kind of a big assembly line, piece by piece way. So instead of like cutting out all the pieces of one whale, sewing it all up, stuffing it, finishing it, and then starting on the next whale, I cut out all of the pieces of all of the whales, which took a long time. But it worked really well for me and my brain, because I tend to like very specific parts of sewing. I really like when you are pinning it together and sewing it up. And I don't really like cutting or tracing out the patterns. I think it takes forever, and you have to do all the little finicky steps, and it feels like you've traced around the same outline 4 times by the time you're done. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try and be smart and work with my brain here. So I cut all of them out at once so that I did not have to go back and cut anything else out, which was very nice, because then I had all of the pieces that I need and I never had to like reset them all out. And then I sewed up all of the fins first for a similar reason, because all the fins you have to sew individually before you can put the whale together, so that you can pin them into the side seam like I'm doing here. So I did all of the fins because I knew that they were going to be finicky and I was going to have to turn all of them out individually and sew them all up. So I did all of the little fins, and they're so cute. Their little arms just, they bring me joy. I love them so much. So I pinned all of the fins into the side seams, and by all I mean I forgot about the fins quite often. There were a few whales, including the very first one that I made, that I had to go seam rip some of that side seam and then put the arm back in and be like, no, you, meh. So I tried to make a point of doing that first so that I couldn't forget. So as I started doing it, I got way better about making sure that I was not forgetting those. I did that with the hearts too later on when I was sewing up all their mouths. I would always forget to put the heart in, and then I'd have to undo their mouth and put the heart in and sew it up again. I just get distracted and really focused on what I'm doing, but it's part of the process with me, you know? Sometimes you have to take things apart and do it all over again. You learn. So then I could sew up the rest of the whale. You saw me sewing the tail on, which again, if I could do the pattern over again, I am fixing that so that it's just one big piece. And then it was time for one of the most exciting parts, which was turning all of the whales inside out so that they would start to look like little whale bodies. It was I liked this part. It was a little bit tedious because you have to really like get in there to turn the tails inside out. You have to really get in there with a pencil, but it works. And while all of the whales were still unstuffed, I went in and sewed all of their little button eyeballs on, which was very silly because I just had like all of these whales spread out in front of me on the bed, and I was like hoarding all these buttons. I had to go and like gather buttons off of random things that I never wear so that I could have enough, because I don't really have buttons lying around. And I was sitting there sewing them all on, and I was like, you know what I feel like right now is the intro to Coraline, where the other mother is like stitching Coraline together. It was very silly, but I was having a lot of fun. I also really loved stuffing them. Something about just like grabbing handfuls of the scrap fabric and like getting to squish it all around so that it filled out the entire outline, so that all the lines were nice, and then you got to just like feel it coming together. I mean, it just became this beautiful thing right before your eyes. It was so beautiful. So by the end of it, I made 7 whales, and I love them. I cannot recommend this enough. If you need some serotonin in your life, might I suggest a little whale. These were incredibly easy to put together once I got the hang of, you know, what order I needed to put everything together in. They came together in 2 days. Like the vastly time-consuming part was cutting up all of the fabric, and that was stuff that I had to do anyway. And it was so easy to just sit down and throw something on and cut fabric for a couple hours, and this is what you get. This is what you get out of it. It's so cool to me that like all of the scraps and things that I saved now have a new life. They get to like live and be loved and be little whales. And all of those fabric scraps that were in that like giant Goodwill bag fit. I would like to announce for the general public, the giant Goodwill bag, this puppy, was completely full when I began this. Full to the brim, full to bursting. I could not even, like, the reason why I even started this was because I could not physically keep any more fabric scraps, and I knew that I was gonna have them. And when I was cutting fabric scraps, it got to be probably about this full before I started filling them. The rest of the fabric that's in there is fabric that I still need to shred. But that was probably the amount of volume of scraps that I had once I had cut them all up, and that filled 7 whales. And I thought that I was gonna have tons extra, and I did not. I actually like ran out and had to cut more. So this is a great use of all of that stuff. It's sustainable, it's so much fun, and it's filled with so much love and excitement and creativity. So this is probably one of the best accomplishments of my life. So I also have put a pattern in the description. I tried to fix it because there's a little bit of like a weirdness with the tail, but if you put it together, it'll be fine. It made me so happy, so I thought, you know what, it won't be super hard to scan all those pieces. So I gave them a little scan and I put them in the description with some instructions. So if you really want to make a whale of your own, you can. So yeah, that's all for this summer sew it all. Stick around for the next one, and hopefully there will be many more whales in our futures. Bye! Woo! That's a blooper for sure.